Paris, 1913. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and champagne-soaked applause, echoing off velvet walls in the grand theaters of the Belle Epoque. The man of the hour was Harry Fragson, a Franco-British music hall sensation, adored for his comic songs, witty impersonations, and effortless charm. He wasn't just a performer, he was a cultural obsession. Women swooned at his feet. Men tried to copy his style, and as his fame soared across Europe, no one could have imagined that. Fragson's greatest threat wasn't a rival or critic, but his own blood. Born Leon Philippe Pot on July 2, 1869, in London, Harry Fragson was the son of a French hotelier and a British mother. He grew up speaking both languages fluently, navigating to cultures with a fluidity that would one day define his career. But the story of Harry Fragson is not just one of fame, it's a psychological tragedy. At the center of it stood a volatile, increasingly paranoid man, his father, Victor Pot. As Harry's fame skyrocketed, his father's mental state deteriorated. The two stories would intertwine in ways that still shock criminologists today. In the music halls of London and Paris, Fragson was electric. With his distinctive round face, slicked hair, and impish expressions, he commanded every stage he graced. He became a household name with songs like Hello, Hello, Who's Your Lady, Friend, and All the Girls Are Lovely by the Seaside. But what made Fragson unique was his ability to reflect both British restraint and French flamboyance. He was a performer of two worlds, able to charm kings and commoners alike. Fame embraced him like a velvet glove, but at home darkness crept in like a cold draft under a locked door. Victor Pot had once been a respectable figure, a hotel manager, proud of his son's early talents. But with age came isolation, and with isolation came madness. Victor grew obsessed with religion and politics. He ranted endlessly about Catholic conspiracies and claimed secret societies were spying on him. He stopped eating with the family. He stopped bathing. He began writing frantic letters, denouncing everyone he knew. When Harry moved him into a modest apartment to live in peace, Victor saw it not as love but exile. By 1913, Harry Fragson was at the height of his fame. He had just completed a wildly successful tour of Europe and was preparing to headline the Alhambra Theatre in London. He was earning thousands of francs a week, an extraordinary sum for the time. But none of that wealth could save him from the decaying mind of his father. Friends said Fragson lived in constant anxiety. Victor's behavior was becoming erratic. He once slapped a housekeeper for poisoning his soup. Fragson, still loyal, refused to cut ties completely. That loyalty would cost him everything. On the night of December 30th, 1913, Harry Fragson visited his father at the apartment on Rue de Richelieu in Paris. It was meant to be a brief, polite visit, a gesture of holiday goodwill before returning to rehearsals. Fragson was due on stage in London within days. But what happened in that small, grim room would echo in the headlines for weeks. Fragson opened the door, perhaps with a bouquet, perhaps with nervous hope. What greeted him was a loaded revolver in his father's trembling hand. Victor had been stewing for days. He believed his son was mocking him, sabotaging his reputation, even conspiring with political enemies. To him, Harry Fragson, his own flesh and blood, had become a demon, an agent of corruption, a symbol of betrayal. The exact trigger remains a mystery. Some say they argued over a trivial matter. Others suggest Victor had planned the murder long in advance, but the outcome was certain. As Harry stepped into the room, Victor raised the revolver and fired point blank. The bullet struck Harry in the chest. He collapsed instantly, crumpling to the floor without a scream. Neighbors reported hearing a thud and then silence. Moments later, Victor wandered out of the apartment in a daze. He told a nearby officer, almost casually, "I've just shot my son. He deserved it." The coldness of the confession stunned even seasoned detectives. When police arrived, they found Fragson's body still warm, his eyes wide open, a single drop of blood trailing from the corner of his lip. News of the murder spread like wildfire. By morning, every Parisian newspaper ran the story, and by evening, London's press was in hysterics. "Murdered by his father," screamed the headlines. The entertainment world was stunned. Fans couldn't comprehend the cruelty of it. How could a father destroy the very star he once nurtured? Rumors flooded the streets. Was it jealousy? Was Victor possessed? The truth, in many ways, was more disturbing. He was mentally ill, and no one had stopped him. Victor was arrested without resistance. In the police wagon, he sang to himself in broken French, quoting Bible verses and muttering about papist plots. When questioned, he showed no remorse. He was evil, Victor said. He had to be punished. Doctors were called in. Psychiatric evaluations were ordered. It quickly became clear that Victor Pot had descended into full-blown paranoia and delusion. The court would later describe him as suffering from chronic religious mania. But none of that could bring Fragson back. At Harry Fragson's funeral, thousands lined the streets of Paris. The procession crawled from the theater district to the cemetery, led by musicians and weeping fans. His coffin, draped in white lilies, was carried past posters of his final performance. Some spectators fainted, others clutched their children close to them. Fragson wasn't just a singer, he was a symbol of joy in a darkening world. And now, that joy had been stolen by madness. In London, memorial services were held across the city. The Alhambra Theatre dimmed its lights in his honor. Performers across the UK dedicated songs to his memory. One British paper described him as the first true entertainer of modern Europe. Another lamented, he lived by laughter and died by lunacy. But behind the headlines was a chilling realization: mental illness had claimed not one, but two lives, one in a grave, the other behind bars. The trial of Victor Pot began in early 1914, but it wasn't a spectacle, it was a tragedy. The man who took the stand was not the killer from the tabloids, but a broken, confused, near catatonic shell. He spoke in riddles. He asked the judge if he was the Pope. He tried to bless the courtroom. The defense argued for insanity, and the court, reluctantly, agreed. Victor was sentenced not to prison, but to a psychiatric asylum, where he would spend the remainder of his life, sedated and forgotten. As Europe plunged into the First World War, the story of Harry Fragson faded from the front pages. His name, once in lights, was slowly extinguished by the roar of cannons and the grief of millions. But in quiet corners of Paris and London, his songs still played on gramophones, and his face lingered in framed posters, smiling forever in that moment. Before the bullets struck, fame had made him immortal, but madness had made him myth. The Harry Fragson case is more than a tale of murder. It is a cautionary story about unchecked mental illness, fractured family ties, and the tragic price of fame. It forces us to ask unsettling questions. Could Fragson have been saved? Could Victor have been treated in time? Or were they both caught in a cycle, too old and too dark to escape? In the glow of the stage lights, no one saw the shadow growing just off stage until it pulled the curtain down for good. In the months following Harry Fragson's death, the Parisian artistic community was left reeling. The cafes where he once performed were haunted by silence. Theater owners left his dressing room untouched. In Montmartre, where creativity bloomed beneath the gaslights, his absence was more than physical, it was spiritual. Harry had embodied the Belle Epoc's whimsical defiance of tragedy. Now, his violent death echoed like a final, bitter note. The irony was unbearable. The man who made the world laugh had died in the darkest domestic horror. Friends of Fragson began to piece together fragments of his final days. They recalled how tense he had become, how the smile behind his jokes had begun to feel strained. Some had witnessed his father's erratic behavior at parties, Victor muttering to himself, or staring too long at his son with a look not of pride, but contempt. One actress recounted a chilling moment. Victor had whispered to her, "He sings for the devils now." She thought he was just being eccentric. No one imagined he meant it literally. As investigators reconstructed the crime, a clearer picture of Victor's descent emerged. He had been writing letters to government officials, accusing Harry of spreading blasphemous art. He mailed drawings of his son with horns and demon wings. He had even written to the Vatican. The authorities had dismissed him as a harmless crank, but the signs were there, loud and horrifying. In one unused letter found in Victor's apartment, he wrote, "He dances like Jezebel and sings for Lucifer. I am the sword of judgment." Chillingly, it was dated just 3 days before the murder. France in 1913 was ill-equipped to deal with mental illness. Psychiatry was primitive, and public understanding of delusional paranoia was almost non-existent. To be mad was to be cursed or criminal, not sick. Families often hid their ill relatives or abandoned them entirely. Harry had done neither. He paid for his father's food, checked in on him, and defended him to others. It was a fatal act of compassion in a world where madness was ignored. Fragson tried to manage it alone, and that kindness became his undoing. The trial had technically concluded with Victor's confinement, but public fascination only deepened. Sensational magazines ran illustrations of the murder scene, dramatic, embellished depictions with blood-slicked carpets and a grinning Victor looming like a ghoul. Some claimed Victor was possessed. Spiritualists insisted Harry's ghost haunted the theater. The truth was less supernatural, but no less tragic. It was a story of untreated psychosis, misjudged loyalty, and a man destroyed by the very love he refused to abandon. Victor Pott was sent to the Charenton Asylum, the same infamous institution that once held the Marquis de Sade. The irony did not go unnoticed. There, he lived in a fog of sedatives and delusion. Nurses reported he often sang Harry's songs in a trembling falsetto or recited the Lord's Prayer backwards. He refused to answer to his own name. He claimed he had executed a demon disguised as a son. When he died in 1920, it was in silence, with no visitors and no ceremony. Meanwhile, Harry Fragson's legacy evolved into a strange kind of legend. Young performers invoked his name for luck. His old music sheets became collector's items. Theater historians began to refer to him as the martyr of the stage. For those who remembered him firsthand, the memory was almost painful to revisit. But every so often, his songs would be resurrected by a cabaret singer, and the haunting contrast between his cheery lyrics and brutal fate would send chills through the audience. In 1925, a silent film loosely based on Fragson's life was released. In France, it portrayed a charismatic singer destroyed by an envious, fanatical father. Though names were changed, the parallels were unmistakable. The film ended with a dramatized vision of Harry's soul ascending from the theater into the stars. It was beautiful, surreal, and deeply misleading. The real ending had come not in light, but in horror. A locked room, a twitching hand, a son bleeding out on the floor as his father watched. The psychology of patricide and filicide has been studied extensively in the decades since. Experts now understand that certain mental illnesses, especially untreated paranoid delusions, can create apocalyptic distortions of reality. To Victor Pott, Fragson wasn't a son anymore. He was a symbol, a threat, a hallucination made flesh. The murder wasn't the climax of a feud, it was the culmination of years of quiet, internal decay. And Fragson's only crime was being too close to the abyss. Today, few remember Fragson by name. He left no descendants. His recordings, made on fragile wax cylinders, are mostly lost. His name is barely a footnote in modern entertainment history. But in the right circles among scholars of Edwardian performance, criminologists, and theatrical obsessives, his story remains one of the most haunting in showbiz history. It is the rare case where talent, tragedy, and madness collided so violently that they became inseparable. Modern readers might struggle to understand why a man as famous as Fragson didn't cut ties with his father, didn't hire protection, didn't escape. But that would be to ignore the most human part of his story, his hope. Fragson believed he could fix what was broken, that love was stronger than delusion, that his father, who once clapped proudly at his first performance, could be saved, that hope was his most beautiful quality and his fatal flaw. In the end, the murder of Harry Fragson wasn't just a singular event, it was a mirror. It reflected the blindness of society toward mental illness, the fragility of fame, and the terrifying truth that the people who love us most are also the ones who can destroy us. His death was not a crime of passion, nor a premeditated conspiracy, but something far more chilling, the logical endpoint of untreated madness, one that struck not in the back alley, but in the family home. Imagine it now, a December night, gas lamps flickering outside the window, a gifted performer standing in the doorway, smiling nervously at the man who raised him, a revolver lifted by a shaking hand, a single crack of gunfire, then silence. The laughter that had echoed across Paris and London fell still forever, and in its place, only a story half forgotten, barely whispered, but too disturbing to die. The story of Harry Fragson, the star who fell not from scandal, not from vice but from love twisted into something monstrous. Years later, a small plaque was erected at the Theatre Marigny in Paris, where Fragson had performed his last sold-out show. It bore no explanation, no tribute to his songs, just one haunting inscription: E. Harry Fragson, Laurier Perdue, to Harry Fragson. The laughter lost. It is perhaps the most fitting memorial, for in the wake of his death, laughter itself seemed tainted, as if joy could no longer be trusted, as if behind every smile, there waited a shadow. And perhaps that is the true legacy of the Harry Fragson case, a reminder that behind every stage, behind every curtain, behind every performer's beaming mask, there's a life no one sees. A private world of loyalty, fear, love, and madness. Fragson lived to make others laugh but died because he couldn't escape the tragedy unfolding in his own home. He was a man of two worlds: British and French, stage and family, fame and frailty. In the end, it was the world no one applauded that claimed him, and the applause, as it always does, moved on.